the night my house burned to the ground. I saw her standing there, arms crossed, smirking, watching everything I owned turn to ash. I thought justice would end the nightmare, until she showed up in HOA courtroom, for her own sentencing. You won't believe what happened when the HOA's most feared Karen tried to play the victim one last time. High voltage, stay till the end, because the twist in this story will make your jaw drop. Bell, don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got more unbelievable real-life HOA dramas every week that'll leave you speechless. Flames. That's the first thing I remember. The roar of it. The furious, living sound of destruction that filled the night like a monster unleashed. I woke to the shriek of the smoke alarm, coughing half-conscious, with my wife screaming my name from down the hallway. In those first seconds, I couldn't tell what was happening, just heat, smoke, and chaos. Then I saw the glow through our bedroom window. The world outside was burning. Our dream home, the one we'd spent 5 years building from scratch with every spare dollar and drop of sweat, was being devoured by fire. The walls crackled like kindling, the roof sagged and hissed, and the air reeked of melting paint and plastic. I stumbled barefoot through the hallway, shouting for my wife. The floorboards were already hot. When I reached the living room, the flames were crawling up the drapes, lighting the ceiling in a dance of orange and black. "We have to get out," my wife cried, clutching our dog in her arms, her face streaked with soot. We bolted for the back door, coughing, eyes watering. The air outside was freezing compared to the furnace behind us. I dragged her across the lawn, heart pounding, and we turned just in time to see the roof collapse inward with a deafening crack. The sound, it wasn't just wood breaking. It was our life breaking. Every memory, every piece of furniture, every photograph, gone in minutes. I fell to my knees in the grass, gasping for air. My wife was crying uncontrollably, clutching the dog as if letting go would make the nightmare real. I remember staring at the flames, frozen. It felt like watching your own heart burn. There's no other way to describe it. Then I saw her. Across the street, bathed in the orange glow of the fire, stood Karen, our HOA President, our neighbor from hell. She was wrapped in her robe, arms crossed, and even from where I stood I could see it, that faint, twisted little smirk. The kind of smile someone makes when they see exactly what they wanted to happen. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe she was just in shock too. But then she turned, whispered something to the man beside her, and walked back into her house like she'd just finished watching a movie. No panic. No concern. Just satisfaction. That image is burned into my mind more vividly than the fire itself. The firefighters arrived within minutes, but it already felt like hours. Sirens wailed through the quiet suburban night, red and blue lights flashing across the smoking wreck that used to be my home. They rushed past us, shouting instructions, unrolling hoses, connecting them to hydrants. The sound of the high-pressure spray hitting the house was deafening. One of them, a young guy, probably in his 20s, ran over and asked if anyone was inside. I shook my head. "Just us," I managed to say, my throat raw. "No one else." He nodded and ran back toward the blaze. I stood there shivering, watching as they fought the fire. Neighbors started gathering around, whispering, filming with their phones. Some brought blankets, others just stared in shock. I barely noticed. My whole world was crumbling in front of me. Then the chief walked over, flashlight in hand, his expression grim. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "Whatever started this, it spread fast." I swallowed hard. Do you know what caused it?" He sighed, glancing back at the charred structure. "Too early to say for sure. But something doesn't look right. We'll bring in investigators first thing in the morning." That sentence hit me like ice water. Something doesn't look right. I turned and looked across the street again. Karen's lights were off. Curtains drawn. But I knew she was awake. Watching. The rest of that night felt endless. We sat in the back of a paramedic truck, wrapped in blankets, answering questions. My wife kept staring at her wedding ring, whispering, "Everything's gone. Everything's gone." The officer taking my statement asked if we had any enemies, anyone who might want to harm us. I almost laughed. Enemies? We're just a couple trying to live our lives. Then I hesitated. One name immediately came to mind. Karen. The HOA tyrant who fined us for painting our shutters the wrong shade of beige. Who had threatened to handle us, after I refused to replace my fence. Who once told me, straight-faced, "This community works because I make it work." But even then, I didn't want to believe it. Burning down a house? No one could be that cruel. Right? By dawn, the fire was out. All that remained was a smoking skeleton of what used to be our dream home. The air smelled like wet ash and heartbreak. The sun rose over the neighborhood like it didn't care what had happened. People started leaving for work as if nothing had changed. We stayed until the fire trucks rolled away. The chief gave me his card and said investigators would arrive later that morning. Then he added, "If I were you, I'd stay somewhere safe tonight. Just in case." Those words stuck with me. Just in case. My wife and I checked into a motel on the edge of town. She fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from crying. I couldn't sleep at all. I sat by the window, staring at the gray sky, my mind looping the same image again and again, Karen's smirk in the firelight. That wasn't the face of someone shocked or concerned. It was the face of someone who'd won. By sunrise, I drove back to what was left of our property. The investigators were already there, combing through the wreckage. I stayed behind the yellow tape, numb, until one of them walked over and said quietly, "Sir, do you have any enemies?" That question again. I didn't answer. I just looked up across the street. Karen's blinds fluttered. For just a second, I saw her watching me, her face half hidden, her eyes cold. Then the curtain fell shut. At that moment, I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but deep down I knew. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad wiring, or a lightning strike, or faulty equipment. Someone had set that fire. And the person who did it was standing just 50 feet away. The woman who'd made our lives miserable for months. The woman who ran the HOA like her personal kingdom. The woman who smiled while my life went up in flames. That's when I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, I'd find out the truth. And when I did, Karen would regret ever lighting that match. If someone had told me a year ago that my biggest nightmare would start with a neighborhood barbecue, I'd have laughed. Back then, everything felt perfect. My wife, Emily, and I had just moved into our dream home, a 2-story craftsman with cedar siding and a wide porch overlooking the lake. After years of saving and working overtime, we'd finally built something of our own. The neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard, neatly trimmed lawns, white fences, and friendly smiles. But like most picture-perfect things, it only took a while to realize the cracks ran deep beneath the surface. And at the center of those cracks stood Karen Davenport, the self-proclaimed guardian of community standards. It was our first HOA meeting. I didn't know what to expect, maybe a casual chat about lawn care or trash pickup schedules. Instead, it felt like stepping into a corporate boardroom with folding chairs. At the front table sat Karen, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it could cut glass, her lips painted in what I can only describe as disapproval red. "Welcome everyone," she began, tapping her stack of papers like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind all residents that adherence to the HOA handbook ensures harmony in our community." That word, harmony, she said it like it was a weapon. When it came time for introductions, I stood up and smiled. "Hi, I'm Mark Lawson. My wife Emily and I just moved in on Lakeside Drive. Excited to be here." Karen gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah yes, the new homeowners. I reviewed your exterior paint colors myself. Good choice, though the trim could be slightly lighter next time." Everyone chuckled awkwardly. I just nodded, not realizing that her slightly lighter comment would later turn into a $200 fine. After the meeting, Karen approached us with her usual sharp smile. "We're very particular about how things are done here," she said. "You'll find the community thrives because of structure." I thanked her, thinking she was just one of those overly enthusiastic rule followers. Emily, ever the polite one, even invited her over for coffee sometime. "Oh, I don't do casual visits," Karen replied flatly. "I prefer formal appointments." That should have been our first red flag. A few weeks later, we got our welcome package from the HOA. Inside was a stack of forms, a list of approved paint colors, a landscaping guide, and a booklet so thick it looked like a legal manual. The cover read, "The Davenport Lakes HOA, maintaining excellence since 2004. Yep. Named after her family. She wasn't just the president, She was the founder's daughter. This was her kingdom, and every house was her subject. At first, we tried to play along. We trimmed the hedges to regulation height. We even repainted our mailbox to match the approved neutral palette. But it didn't matter. The letters started coming anyway. The first one said, "Notice of non-compliance. Trash bins visible from street view." We'd left them out for maybe 30 minutes after pickup. The second one, "Violation. Lawn growth exceeds 2.75 inches." I measured it myself. It was barely 2.5. The third one hit harder, "Warning. Unauthorized modification. Backyard lighting." All I'd done was install small solar lights along the fence, something dozens of neighbors had. When I asked Karen why ours were an issue, she said, "You didn't file a lighting request form. It's about principle, Mr. Lawson." I remember standing there on her porch, holding that stupid letter, feeling anger bubbling up. Principle? Or control? I asked. Her smile vanished. "Careful," she said softly. "Attitudes like that don't fit in Davenport Lakes." That's when I realized something. This wasn't about community harmony. This was about power. The next few months were a slow, steady war of wills. Karen would drive by in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect the neighborhood, but always stopping in front of our house just a little longer than anyone else's. She'd jot something down, shake her head, and move on. Our neighbors sympathized but stayed quiet. "You don't want to cross her," one whispered during a block party. "Last guy who did?" They started fining him weekly until he sold his house. I didn't believe them, until I met Jerry. Jerry lived 2 streets over. His lawn was immaculate, but his driveway had a small crack. Karen fined him for it, citing unsafe conditions. When he fought back, she hit him with a new violation every week: trash placement, mailbox size, even unapproved holiday decorations. Within 3 months, he moved away. "Karen runs this place like a dictatorship," he told me the day before he left. "You either obey, or she burns you down, figuratively speaking." I didn't realize how literal that warning would become. Things got personal when Karen began targeting Emily. She left a note taped to our front door: "Your flower arrangement does not comply with HOA landscaping uniformity. Please remove non-approved colors, pink and red." Emily loved those flowers. They reminded her of her late mother. She came inside crying. I tried to comfort her, but that night as we lay in bed I said, "Maybe we should just ignore her." Emily shook her head. "No, Mark. People like her win because no one fights back." That's when I decided, enough was enough. The next HOA meeting, I walked in with every violation letter she'd sent us. I placed them on the table in front of everyone and said, "You all realize none of these are legitimate, right? She's just bullying people." The room went silent. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Lawson," she said coolly, "if you're implying misconduct, I suggest you bring evidence instead of accusations." I smiled. "Oh, don't worry. I will." That was the moment everything shifted. From then on, she wasn't just the HOA president, I was her target. A week later, I woke to find tire tracks across my lawn. A dead bird left on my porch. And another fine in the mail, this one for property neglect. I remember laughing bitterly. She wasn't even subtle anymore. Emily wanted to move, but I refused. "If we leave," I told her, "she wins." I didn't know it yet, but that stubborn decision, to stand our ground, would cost us everything. Because from that day forward, Karen stopped hiding her hatred. And the woman who once obsessed over mailbox colors was about to take things to a level no one could have imagined. It all started with something so small, so harmless, it shouldn't have even mattered: a fence. That's it. Just a simple backyard fence. But in a neighborhood ruled by an HOA tyrant like Karen, even a fence could turn into a full-blown war. When Emily and I first moved in, the old fence behind our house was barely standing. It leaned like a drunk sailor after a storm, the wood soft from rot, nails rusted through. Every time our dog brushed against it, a board would crack. I figured I'd save some money by building a new one myself. I'd done construction back in college, and it felt good to get my hands dirty again. So I spent a few weekends sketching out designs. Nothing flashy, just sturdy cedar panels with a clean finish. Something that would last. When it was ready, I did what every rule-abiding neighbor was supposed to do. I submitted my plans to the HOA. Simple, right? Wrong. A week later, I got a letter that started with the words, "Application denied. Fence design does not conform to community aesthetic standards." I reread it 3 times. My design matched every guideline listed in the HOA handbook. 6-foot panels? Check. Natural wood color? Check. Spacing? Perfect. I couldn't see the problem, unless the problem was me. I decided to call Karen directly. "Karen," I said as politely as possible, "I got your letter about my fence. Can you tell me exactly what's wrong with it?" She paused for a long moment. I could almost hear her smirk through the phone. "Well, Mark, the grain of the wood in your photo appears darker than approved cedar tone. It might stand out from the rest of the community." I stared at the phone in disbelief. "You denied my fence because the grain looked too dark?" "Yes. We want everything to blend seamlessly. Uniformity maintains property values," she said, like she was quoting a rulebook carved in stone. "Karen, it's wood, not paint. You can't control grain color." "Oh, I can control what's approved, Mr. Lawson." And with that, she hung up. I wasn't the kind of man to let nonsense slide. So I printed my design, attached material samples, and resubmitted it, this time highlighting every line in the HOA rules that showed my design was compliant. A week later, another letter came. "Application denied. Fence height exceeds acceptable limits when measured from rear elevation." I went out back with a tape measure. 6 feet, exactly. I even measured twice. She was inventing reasons now. Emily tried to calm me down. "Maybe she's just being difficult because you embarrassed her at the last meeting." "That's fine," I said. "She can be difficult. But she's not going to bully me into backing off." By the 3rd rejection letter, I'd had enough. I decided to bring it up in front of everyone at the next HOA meeting. When I arrived, the air in the room was thick. Karen sat at the head table, her stack of official documents neatly arranged like she was preparing for trial. When she called for open discussion, I stood up. "Karen, I'd like to know why my fence has been denied 3 times for reasons that don't exist in the HOA handbook." Her smile didn't even twitch. "Because your fence does not meet the community's unified standard." I held up a copy of the rules. Page 17, Section B, "It meets every line, exactly." She leaned back in her chair. "Then perhaps you don't understand the spirit of the guideline." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "The spirit? Are you serious? So now we're enforcing ghost rules?" A few neighbors snickered. Karen's face hardened. "Mr. Lawson, you're out of line." "No," I said, taking a step forward, my voice steady. "You're out of line. You've turned this HOA into your personal playground. I pay dues like everyone else, and I'll build my fence according to the actual rules, not whatever mood you're in that day." Her lips thinned. "If you proceed without approval, you'll be fined daily. And the HOA has full authority to remove unauthorized structures." "You mean you do?" I shot back. "Because no one else here seems to have a say." A silence fell over the room. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Karen loved her control, and everyone knew challenging her came with consequences. Finally, she leaned forward and said, almost whispering, "You'll regret this." The next day, I started building the fence anyway. I woke early, rolled out my tools, and began digging post holes. The sun was hot, but it felt good to do something for myself for once, to take back control. By noon, I'd set the first few panels. That's when her car slowed to a stop at the curb. Karen stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, looking like a sheriff about to serve a warrant. "Mr. Lawson," she called, her tone dripping with authority. "You're in violation." "Morning to you too," I said, hammering another nail. She marched closer. "You were instructed not to begin construction until approval was granted." Approval should have been granted 3 weeks ago. The rules say the HOA has 30 days to respond, and I've got 3 rejections with fake reasons. I'm done waiting. Her face flushed red. "Then you'll be fined $500 per day until this fence is removed." "Then fine me," I said without looking up. "But this fence is staying." She stood there for a long moment, her jaw tight, before finally turning and walking away. But I noticed something as she left. She wasn't just angry. She looked offended. Like I'd personally insulted her throne. 2 days later, a letter showed up taped to my door. Immediate action required. Unauthorized construction. Cease and desist or face legal action. And right beneath it, written in pen, were the words, "You think you can win? Watch me." No signature. But I didn't need one. That week, strange things started happening. My trash cans were tipped over every morning. My sprinkler system mysteriously stopped working. And once, I came home to find a pile of dead leaves dumped neatly on my driveway, the same leaves from the park across the street where Karen often walked her dog. It was like she wanted me to know she was watching. Emily begged me to let it go, but I couldn't. It wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about principle, about standing up to a bully who thought she could control everyone's life. But that's the thing about people like Karen, when they start to lose control, they don't back down. They double down. And I didn't realize it yet, but this small disagreement, this stupid fence, had lit a fuse that was about to explode into something far darker, far more dangerous than I could ever imagine. Because to Karen, I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was the enemy. If I thought the fence fight was the end of it, I couldn't have been more wrong. It was just the beginning, the moment Karen shifted from petty rule enforcement to full-blown obsession. You'd think once the fence was built, life would go back to normal. But in Karen's world, there was no such thing as letting things go. To her, I'd committed the ultimate sin, defying her authority. And she was determined to make me pay for it. It started small, quiet, calculated annoyances that seemed innocent enough to anyone else. The first letter arrived 2 days after the fence went up. Violation notice. Lawn showing signs of overgrowth. Immediate maintenance required. Funny thing was, I just mowed it that morning. I even took photos to prove it. The next day, another letter. Fine issued, unauthorized exterior lighting installation. That one made me laugh out loud. It was for the same solar lights she'd already complained about months earlier, the ones that had been approved long before the fence fiasco. Emily tried to brush it off. Maybe it's just coincidence, she said, stirring her coffee, though her voice lacked conviction. Coincidence? I asked, waving the stack of letters. This is her way of getting revenge. She's trying to bury us in paperwork. And that's exactly what she did. Every week, a new violation. Some were ridiculous: garage door left open too long, dog barking during quiet hours, unauthorized use of decorative flags. Each letter came with the same smug HOA letterhead and at the bottom, her signature in perfect cursive, Karen Davenport, HOA President. It wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about power. A few of our neighbors noticed what was happening. Some tried to stay neutral, but others whispered quiet warnings when Karen wasn't around. One afternoon, as I was raking the yard, an older neighbor named Tom stopped by. "You're not the first one she's done this to," he said in a low voice. "Karen's been running this HOA like her own empire for years. She fined my daughter once for having pink patio chairs." "Pink chairs?" I asked. He nodded. Said they disrupted the neighborhood color harmony. "She doesn't like anyone who doesn't bow to her. Be careful, son. She'll find ways to make your life hell." I didn't want to believe it, but Tom's warning echoed in my head every time another letter appeared in my mailbox. Then came the surprise inspections. Karen claimed she was monitoring compliance. But somehow, her inspections always happened when I wasn't home. One day, Emily called me at work, her voice trembling. "Mark, she's in the backyard. She just walked through the gate with her clipboard." "What?" I shouted. "She's trespassing." By the time I got home, she was gone, but she'd left a notice pinned to the new fence, unauthorized structural addition. Possible encroachment into HOA easement. Investigation pending. That was the moment I stopped playing nice. I marched across the street and knocked on her door so hard the wreath rattled. She opened it slowly, giving me that fake, sugary smile. "Mr. Lawson. What a surprise. You stepped onto my property without permission," I said, holding up the notice. "You ever do that again, I'll have you charged with trespassing." She folded her arms. "Oh, calm down. I'm allowed to inspect any property within HOA boundaries." "No, you're not," I snapped. "The bylaws say you need written notice and owner consent." You had neither. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. You really should read the fine print, dear. I have, I said. And I know you're crossing the line. You're not the law, Karen. Her lips curved into a cold smile. We'll see about that. Then she closed the door in my face. That week, the fines doubled. Then tripled. She sent letters marked urgent and even mailed copies to our mortgage company, claiming we were in violation of community integrity. It was insane. Emily started losing sleep. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking she heard footsteps outside. Once we found tire marks in the driveway, deep, deliberate ones. Another time, someone slashed our garden hose clean through. I called the HOA office, but they were just an answering service. No one else from the board ever returned my calls. It was like Karen was the HOA, and she made sure we knew it. Then came the public humiliation. At the next community meeting, Karen stood at the front with her clipboard, smirking. We have one homeowner who's been particularly resistant to maintaining standards, she said, looking right at me. This kind of behavior damages property values and community spirit. Everyone turned to look at me. Some nodded in sympathy. Others avoided eye contact. I stood up. You're abusing your position, Karen. Everyone here knows it. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. If you can't follow simple rules, perhaps you should consider a community with fewer expectations. My jaw tightened. Or maybe one with fewer tyrants. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned bright red, but she forced a smile. Duly noted, Mr. Lawson. I'll make sure your comments are recorded for our next review. She didn't need to say it. I knew I just made things worse. After that night, the harassment became personal. We started getting anonymous phone calls late at night. No one spoke, just breathing, slow and deliberate. Packages we never ordered showed up on our porch. A landscaping crew once arrived, saying they'd been hired to regrade our lawn, something we never requested. Every time something strange happened, Karen's blinds would twitch. She was always watching. Emily begged me to let it go, but I couldn't. If we let her walk over us, she'll just do it to someone else, I said. Someone has to stop her. But stopping her wasn't going to be easy. Because Karen didn't just want to win, she wanted control. And the more she felt it slipping, the more dangerous she became. The final straw came one Saturday morning when I found a letter taped to my garage door. This one wasn't printed on HOA letterhead. It was handwritten, scrawled in thick marker, "You don't belong here. Leave before things get worse." No signature, no date. Just that single, chilling line. I stood there, staring at it for a long time, the morning sun glaring off the white paint of the garage. That was when I realized this wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was personal. Karen wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to destroy us. And I had no idea how far she'd go next. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was done playing defense. Karen had pushed too far, past petty power games and deep into intimidation. The fake fines, the midnight phone calls, the threats taped to my garage, it had gone from harassment to pure madness. That Saturday morning, I told Emily, "I'm going to the meeting, and I'm not walking out until she's exposed." Emily's eyes were full of worry. "Mark, please don't make it worse. She's dangerous." "I know," I said, pulling on my jacket. "That's why it ends today." When I arrived at the community center, the room was already packed. Karen stood at the front, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her pearl necklace gleaming like she dressed for a royal hearing instead of a neighborhood meeting. She gave me that tight, condescending smile as I walked in. "Oh, Mr. Lawson. So glad you could join us. We were just about to begin." I could feel the stares. People whispered in the back, their voices hushed but full of curiosity. Everyone in that room knew there was tension between us, but no one really knew how bad it had gotten. I took a seat in the front row. I wasn't here to listen, I was here to speak. Karen started her usual speech, droning about community pride and upholding standards, waving her clipboard like a weapon. Then she glanced at me, her tone sharpening. "Unfortunately," she said, "some residents continue to challenge the HOA's authority. They refuse to cooperate with regulations and cause unnecessary disruption. It's sad, really. One bad apple can spoil the bunch." I stood up slowly. You mean me, right? Let's not dance around it, Karen. Gasps rippled through the audience. A few people turned in their chairs. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting me to call her out so directly. Mr. Lawson, she said, forcing a smile. You're welcome to speak when it's your turn. Oh, I think my turn's been long overdue, I said, walking toward the front. Because I'm tired of your lies and intimidation. Everyone here needs to know what you've been doing. Her face hardened. Sit down, or I'll have security escort you out. There is no security, I shot back. You made sure of that when you fired the last company for not being cooperative. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen shifted uncomfortably but lifted her chin. I'm not sure what fantasy you're living in, but I've done nothing wrong. Oh really? I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers, copies of every violation notice she'd sent, every fake fine, every threatening letter. Then explain this. I slammed them down on the table in front of her. This is harassment. You've targeted me for months because I wouldn't let you boss me around. You broke onto my property, you trespassed, and now you're sending threats. You think nobody notices, but they do. The room went silent. All eyes were on her. Karen let out a small fake laugh. This is absurd. Clearly you're just angry that your home doesn't meet our standards. You've been combative from the start. I took a step closer. Combative? You sent someone to slash my garden hose. You left a note on my garage saying, leave before things get worse. You think that's community spirit? The mask slipped for just a second, her smile wavered, and I caught a flash of something dark in her eyes. But she recovered quickly. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said sweetly. Maybe you wrote that note yourself to gain sympathy. That hit me like a slap. You're unbelievable, I said. You ruin people's peace, and when they fight back, you play the victim. Karen turned to the board members sitting beside her. Two of them looked nervous, like they'd rather be anywhere else. Do you see what I mean? She said dramatically. Hostile behavior. He's been aggressive for months. I think it's time we consider suspension of his community privileges. Someone from the back shouted, that's not fair. It was Tom, the older neighbor who'd warned me before. We've all seen how you treat him, Karen. You fine people for nonsense, and we're all sick of it. Another voice joined in. Yeah. You fined my wife for having a bird feeder. Karen's face reddened. This meeting is out of order, she barked, slamming her clipboard on the table. But now the room had turned against her. The whispers grew louder. People started talking, really talking, for the first time. Stories poured out about her pettiness, her threats, her control. It was like watching a dam break. I turned back to Karen. You see? It's not just me. You've been bullying this entire neighborhood. Her lips trembled with fury. You think you can turn them against me? No, I said. You did that yourself. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her eyes darted around the room, as if realizing she was losing control. Then she picked up her clipboard, pressed it tightly to her chest, and hissed under her breath, You'll regret this, Mark Lawson. I promise you will. Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile floor. The meeting ended in chaos. People surrounded me, some clapping my back, others thanking me for standing up. It felt like a small victory, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Because Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. That night, as Emily and I sat on the porch, she asked, Do you think it's finally done? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe Karen would finally back off now that everyone had seen her for who she really was. But my gut told me otherwise. People like her don't quit, I said quietly. They wait. They plot. Then they strike when you least expect it. I looked across the street at her house. Her blinds were closed, but I could feel her eyes on me anyway. That was the last peaceful night we had for a long time. Because Karen wasn't planning her next HOA fine. She was planning something far darker. Something that would change everything forever. It was a chilly Friday evening, quiet, still, almost too peaceful. The kind of night when the world feels safe. Emily was baking her famous cinnamon rolls in the kitchen, the smell filling the house, and I was sitting by the window, reading an old book I hadn't touched in years. For the first time in months, things felt almost normal. Almost. Because even when things seemed calm, Karen was still in the back of my mind. I'd catch myself glancing out the window at her house across the street, her porch light glowing like an unblinking eye. The blinds were shut tight, but I could feel her there. Watching. Waiting. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the confrontation at the HOA meeting, and she hadn't made a move. No new letters. No fake fines. No trespassing. That should have felt like a relief, but to me, it felt like the calm before a storm. And I was right. That night, around 11:30, Emily and I were about to head to bed when I heard something outside. A faint metallic sound, like someone opening a gas can. I froze. "Mark?" Emily asked, sensing my tension. "What is it?" I held up my hand. "Stay quiet." I walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. The yard was still, the street lamp casting long shadows across the lawn. But then, near the edge of the fence, I saw movement, a dark figure crouched low, fiddling with something near the side of the house. At first, I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a stray dog. But then I saw the glint of metal. A gas can. My blood ran cold. "Emily," I whispered, "call 911. Right now." She looked confused for a split second before realizing what I meant. Her face went pale. "Oh my God." I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and burst out the front door shouting, "Hey, what are you doing?" The figure froze for a heartbeat, then darted away into the darkness. But not before I caught a glimpse of something, blonde hair catching the light, and a familiar floral-patterned scarf fluttering behind her. Karen. I sprinted toward the side of the house. The smell hit me before I saw it, gasoline. Someone had poured it along the base of the siding, a trail leading toward the back porch. My hands shook as I dropped to my knees, trying to soak it up with a towel, anything to stop it from spreading. Emily's voice rang out from the doorway. "They said they're sending a unit now. Are you okay?" I nodded, breathless. "Just keep the lights off." Every instinct told me she wasn't done. Karen had lost control, and this wasn't just revenge anymore. It was hatred, burning and raw. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flicker. For a split second, I thought it was the reflection of my flashlight. But then it grew, an orange tongue licking the base of the fence, spreading fast. "Fire!" I yelled. "Emily, get out." The flames caught quicker than I could have imagined. The wood fence Karen had once called unsightly became a fuse, crackling and roaring as it raced toward the house. I ran inside, coughing from the smoke that was already seeping in. "Emily, grab the photo albums, go go go." She was crying, her hands trembling as she scooped up what she could. The heat pressed against the walls, windows glowing orange from the reflection outside. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen and ran back out, spraying the base of the flames. But it was useless. The fire was too big, too fast. By the time the first sirens echoed in the distance, the whole side of the house was engulfed. The sky turned red, the air thick with smoke. I remember yelling Emily's name, grabbing her hand, and pulling her down the driveway as fire trucks screamed toward us. Our neighbors were running out of their homes, shouting, calling for help, watching in horror as our home, our dream, was consumed. And through it all, across the street, I saw her. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, that same expressionless face illuminated by the firelight. No shock. No concern. Just stillness. Like she was watching a show she'd written herself. The firefighters worked for hours, battling the blaze. I watched helplessly from the curb, wrapped in a blanket someone had given Emily. She was crying softly, her face streaked with ash and tears. A firefighter walked over, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir. We did what we could. The structure's a total loss." I nodded numbly. Words wouldn't come. He hesitated before saying, "You might want to talk to the fire marshal when he gets here. We're seeing signs this wasn't accidental." I turned sharply. "What do you mean?" He looked uncomfortable. "Gasoline residue near the origin point. It's early, but it looks deliberate." I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. Karen had done this. Hours later, after the fire was out and the trucks were gone, I sat in the back of a police cruiser, giving my statement. I told them everything, about the harassment, the threats, the note, even what I'd seen earlier that night. The officer scribbled notes. You're saying you saw your neighbor, Karen Davenport, near the house just before the fire started? Yes, I said firmly. I saw her with a gas can. I shouted at her. She ran. He nodded slowly. We'll check the security footage from nearby houses. If she was there, we'll find her. Emily gripped my arm, her voice shaking. Do you think she'll try something again? I looked at the smoldering wreck of our home. The fire had taken everything, our furniture, our keepsakes, even the walls where we marked our son's height as he grew up. Everything. No, I said quietly, though my voice felt hollow. She's already done it. But in my gut, I knew the truth. People like Karen didn't stop at destruction. They needed to watch the aftermath. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the smoke in eerie shades of gold and gray, I saw a car pull out of her driveway. Karen's car. She slowed down as she passed the ruins of our house, rolled down her window, and looked right at me. No words. Just that same, faint smile. And then she drove away. That was the moment I made a silent promise. She thought she'd broken me. But she was wrong. Because if she thought she could burn down my life and walk away free, she had no idea what was coming next. The morning after the fire felt like waking up in another life, one covered in ash and silence. The once bright, warm home that had held birthdays, dinners, and laughter was now a charred skeleton, still smoking in places where the embers hadn't fully died. The smell of burnt wood clung to everything, thick and bitter. Emily stood beside me in the driveway, wrapped in a blanket that one of the firefighters had given her. Her face was pale, eyes red and distant. Neither of us spoke. There were no words big enough for what we'd lost. But behind all the grief, something else was growing inside me. Anger. Not the kind that fades after a few hours, the kind that sinks deep, sharp, and cold. Because I knew who had done this. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. By noon, the investigators from the fire marshal's office arrived. 2 men and a woman in heavy coats began taking photographs and samples from the wreckage. I tried to keep my distance at first, but I couldn't help pacing near them, desperate for answers. One of them, a tall man with soot-streaked boots and a calm tone, approached me. Mr. Lawson? I'm Fire Investigator Harris. We're going to be conducting a full arson investigation here. I'll need to ask you a few questions. Of course, I said quickly. Whatever you need. He flipped open a small notepad. Can you walk me through what happened last night? I took a deep breath. My wife and I were inside around 11:30. I heard someone outside, near the side of the house. When I went to check, I saw a woman pouring something from a gas can. When I yelled, she ran. He looked up sharply. You saw her face? Yes, I said, my voice steady. It was my neighbor, Karen Davenport. He scribbled something down, then asked, Do you have any prior issues with her? Disputes? Arguments? I gave a short, bitter laugh. You could say that. She's the HOA President. She's been harassing us for months. Fake fines, trespassing, threats. I even got a note saying, leave before things get worse. Harris nodded, expression unreadable. Do you still have that note? I gave it to the police last night. Good, he said. We'll need that. And anything else that connects her to this. I could tell he was trying to stay professional, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. He'd seen enough of these cases to know when something smelled wrong, and this one reeked of deliberate malice. Later that afternoon, the police returned to take a more formal statement. Detective Ruiz, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm but commanding presence, took over the case. She walked around the ruins with a measured gaze before approaching me. Mr. Lawson, she said, we've already spoken with the fire department. They confirmed the use of accelerants. This wasn't an accident. I knew it, I said. She nodded. You said you saw your neighbor near the property last night? Yes. Karen Davenport. She ran when I shouted. Any security cameras nearby? Not mine, I admitted. They burned in the fire. But maybe the neighbors have some. She scribbled a note. We'll canvass the area. If she was out here, we'll find her. Before she left, I added quietly, Detective, she didn't just want to scare us. She wanted to destroy us. She's obsessed. Ruiz gave me a long, considering look. Then let's make sure she answers for it. The next day, news of the fire spread through the neighborhood like wildfire itself. Some neighbors stopped by with food or condolences, their faces full of guilt for never stepping in sooner. Others just stood at a distance, whispering among themselves, staring at the blackened wreck of what was once our dream home. But Karen's house? Silent. Curtains drawn tight. Her car sat in the driveway, spotless, as if nothing had happened. Until she came out. Around noon, she stepped onto her porch with a coffee mug, wearing sunglasses and a smug little grin. When her eyes met mine, she didn't flinch. She lifted her mug like she was toasting me. That was it. I stormed across the street before Emily could stop me. "You think this is funny?" I shouted. Karen tilted her head. "Excuse me. You burned my house down. You were there last night. I saw you." Her fake gasp was so overacted it made my blood boil. "You think I would do something like that? My goodness, Mark, that's a serious accusation." "Cut the act," I snapped. "You've been harassing us for months. You threatened me. And now your house burns down, and you blame me," she interrupted, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "That's convenient. But unless you have proof, I suggest you stop spreading lies. People might think you're unstable." I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles went white. "They're investigating you, Karen. They'll find proof." She smiled, slow and cold. "Oh, I'm not worried. You've always been dramatic. Maybe this was an accident. Or maybe," she leaned in slightly, "maybe you did it yourself for insurance." My stomach turned. "You're insane." "No," she said softly. "I'm smart." Then she turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind her. That night, the police returned, this time with good news. Detective Ruiz knocked on the motel door where Emily and I were staying. Her expression was serious, but there was a spark in her eyes. "We pulled security footage from 3 nearby homes," she said. "Guess who we saw walking around your property with a gas can around 11:20 p.m. My heart pounded. "Karen." She nodded. "We also found traces of gasoline on her driveway. And when we questioned her, she couldn't explain why her hands smelled like fuel." Emily's hand gripped mine. "So what happens now?" Ruiz smiled faintly. "We're issuing a warrant for her arrest tonight. She's not getting away with this." When I heard those words, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. Karen had taken our home, our peace, nearly our lives. But now, finally, justice was catching up. I looked out the motel window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere across town, Karen was probably sitting on her perfect couch, sipping wine, thinking she'd won. But the knock on her door that night would change everything. Because the next time I saw her, it wouldn't be across the street. It would be in court. And for once, she'd be the one answering questions. The call came just after midnight. Detective Ruiz's voice on the other end was calm but heavy with meaning. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "we've taken Karen Davenport into custody." For a few seconds, I just sat there in silence, gripping the phone. The words didn't seem real. After everything she'd done, after the months of torment, the fire, the lies, hearing that she was finally caught felt like waking from a nightmare. Emily sat up in bed beside me, her eyes wide. "Is it really her?" I nodded slowly. "They arrested her." She covered her face and started crying, not the kind of sobs that come from sadness, but the deep, trembling ones that come from relief. For the first time since the fire, I saw the weight begin to lift off her shoulders. The next morning, we met Detective Ruiz at the station to give an official statement. She walked us through what had happened. "We had 2 eyewitnesses," she explained. "Neighbors who saw Karen walking around your property that night. One even captured part of it on their doorbell camera. We matched her outfit and her vehicle from the footage. When we searched her house, we found an empty gas can in her garage and clothing that tested positive for accelerant residue." I sat back in my chair, letting it all sink in. "So, she's really going to jail?" Ruiz nodded. "She's been charged with first-degree arson, destruction of property, and endangering lives. Given the evidence, she's not walking away from this." Emily reached for my hand. For the first time in weeks, her grip felt strong again. But then Ruiz added, "There's more. When we searched her computer, we found dozens of documents, fake HOA violation reports, spreadsheets tracking your property, even photos of your house taken at night. She was obsessed. The room went quiet. I looked at the detective, trying to steady my voice. "You're telling me she was planning this?" Ruiz nodded. "For months. We believe the fire was premeditated, a way to punish you for challenging her authority." I swallowed hard. So it wasn't just me. She hated losing control. "That's what it looks like," Ruiz said softly. "People like her don't stop until they're stopped." 2 days later, the story exploded. Local news vans lined the street where our house once stood. The headline flashing across every screen read, "HOA President arrested for arson, neighbor's home destroyed in revenge attack." Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, interviewing residents who'd once been too afraid to speak. "She always thought she ran this place," one neighbor said. "But none of us thought she'd go that far." Another added, "She fined me for putting out a pumpkin in October. I should have known she was crazy." Karen's pristine reputation, the one she'd built with manicured lawns and staged neighborhood parties, shattered overnight. The HOA board announced an emergency meeting, voted to dissolve her presidency, and suspended operations pending investigation. And just like that, the woman who once lorded over everyone was sitting in a jail cell, waiting for her arraignment. Still, justice didn't erase the damage. Emily and I stood one afternoon in front of what was left of our home. The fire investigators had cleared the site, leaving behind blackened beams, melted siding, and fragments of our lives. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air. "This was supposed to be our forever home," Emily whispered. I wrapped my arm around her. "We'll rebuild. I promise." "But how do you rebuild after something like this?" she asked, looking at the ruins. "It's not just the house, Mark. It's the trust. The feeling of safety." She took that. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold her tighter and promise that we'd rise from it, somehow. That evening, as we drove away, we passed by Karen's house. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. A for sale sign had already been staked into the front yard by her family, who clearly wanted nothing to do with her scandal. But something about it still felt eerie. Like her shadow still lingered in that place, watching us from behind those closed blinds. Emily shivered. "I don't ever want to come back here." "We won't," I said firmly. "This neighborhood's lost its soul." The following week, we were asked to attend Karen's arraignment in court. I didn't want to go, but I needed to see her face, needed her to know she hadn't broken me. The courthouse was packed with reporters and residents. The air buzzed with whispers as the deputies led her in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. For a woman who once obsessed over appearances, she looked small, fragile. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes hollow. When she turned and saw me sitting in the gallery, our eyes locked. For a heartbeat, the whole world seemed to go silent. No words were exchanged. No apologies. Just that same cold glare, stripped now of confidence, replaced with pure, festering hatred. The judge read out the charges. Her lawyer muttered something about emotional distress and mental instability, but I barely heard it. My focus was on her. She had tried to destroy my life, and now she was the one facing destruction. When the judge denied her bail, the tension in my chest finally broke. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. After the hearing, Detective Ruiz caught up with me outside the courtroom. "You handled that better than most would have," she said. I managed a small smile. "It's strange. I thought seeing her like that would make me feel angry. But all I feel is, done." "That's how healing starts," Ruiz replied. "Closure isn't about revenge. It's about knowing the truth came out." I nodded, looking up at the courthouse steps where Karen had just been led away. "She thought she was above the law," I said. "But the law caught up." Ruiz smiled faintly. "And now, she'll answer for everything she's done." That night, Emily and I sat together at the small motel where we'd been staying. The TV played softly in the background, covering the news update. Former HOA President Karen Davenport remains in custody after being charged with first-degree arson. Neighbors call the case a wake-up call for abusive homeowners associations. Emily turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's finally over, isn't it?" I reached for her hand. "Almost. There's still the trial." She nodded slowly. Then after that, maybe we start over. Somewhere new. I squeezed her hand. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere without an HOA. We both laughed softly, the first real laugh in months. But deep down, I knew our story wasn't quite finished. Because the next time I'd see Karen, wouldn't be from the gallery. It would be from the witness stand. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, that distinct mix of nerves and justice. Reporters filled the hallway, their cameras flashing every few seconds as the doors to courtroom 2B opened. This was it. The trial of Karen Davenport, once the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, now facing charges that could lock her away for decades. Emily and I sat side by side in the second row, our hands intertwined so tightly my fingers went numb. It had been 6 months since the fire, and though we were slowly rebuilding our lives, the scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. This trial was supposed to bring closure, but part of me feared it would just reopen every wound. Karen entered the courtroom escorted by 2 deputies. The crowd murmured as she took her seat at the defense table. She was almost unrecognizable, her hair dull, her posture slouched. But when her eyes met mine, that same bitterness still flickered there. The smirk she'd worn the night my home burned was gone, replaced by something darker, resentment. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Court is now in session for the case of the state versus Karen Davenport. I glanced at the prosecution table where Detective Ruiz sat with the district attorney, Ms. Harris, a sharp, composed woman with a commanding presence. She'd assured me before the trial that the evidence against Karen was overwhelming. Still, seeing Karen sitting there made me uneasy. How could someone so ordinary, someone who hosted bake sales and led holiday parades, commit something so monstrous? The prosecution began. Ms. Harris rose and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice firm, "this case is about obsession, an obsession with power, control, and revenge. The defendant, Karen Davenport, used her position in the Homeowners Association not to serve her community, but to dominate it. And when one homeowner dared to stand up to her, she decided to destroy him, literally." Her words echoed through the courtroom. I felt every syllable. She continued, "We will show you evidence of premeditation. Surveillance footage placing her near the victim's property. Accelerant residue found on her clothes. Messages she wrote expressing her intent to teach him a lesson. This wasn't an accident. This was arson, fueled by hatred." The jurors sat still, their expressions grim. Then, the defense took their turn. Karen's lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit, stood up with a faint smile. "My client is not a monster," he began. "She's a woman who suffered an emotional breakdown after years of stress running an HOA that constantly dealt with difficult homeowners. The night of the fire was a tragic coincidence. There is no solid proof she started it. My client has been unfairly vilified by social media and the press." I clenched my jaw. A breakdown? That's what they were calling it now? Emily whispered under her breath, "Unbelievable." Then came the witnesses. First was a neighbor, a quiet man named Tim who lived 2 houses down. "I saw her that night," he said. "She was walking across the street toward the Lawsons' place. It was dark, but I recognized her. She had this red gas can in her hand. I thought maybe she was helping with the generator or something, until I saw the fire." Then came another witness, a woman named Beth, who had once been on Karen's HOA board. "She talked about them all the time," Beth testified. "She said Mark Lawson was ruining the community with his attitude. She once told me, if I can't control him, I'll make sure he regrets ever moving here." I didn't think she meant it literally. Each word hit like a hammer. But it was Detective Ruiz who sealed the moment. She took the stand, calm and confident, explaining the investigation, the accelerant traces, the deleted emails from Karen's computer, the late-night search history, how to make a fire look accidental. When she held up a printed photo of Karen's garage, the gas can, the burned clothing, the gloves, even the defense lawyer looked uneasy. Finally, it was my turn. As I walked to the witness stand, the room blurred for a second. My palms were sweaty, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Please state your name," Ms. Harris said. "Mark Lawson." She nodded. "Mr. Lawson, can you tell the jury what happened on the night of the fire?" So I did. I told them about waking up to the smell of smoke, grabbing Emily's hand, the walls glowing orange, the roar of flames. And then, seeing Karen standing across the street, her arms crossed, that faint smirk on her lips as our home turned to ash, I paused, trying to steady my voice. That look, I'll never forget it. It wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was satisfaction. Karen shifted in her seat, avoiding eye contact. When Ms. Harris asked how the fire had changed our lives, I said the truth. It took everything. Our home, our peace, our sense of safety. My wife still wakes up in the middle of the night thinking she smells smoke. We didn't just lose things. We lost trust in people. The courtroom was silent except for the faint sound of someone sniffling in the back. Then came the defense's cross-examination. "Mr. Lawson," the lawyer began, "is it possible that what you saw that night was simply shock? People can misread expressions during traumatic events." I looked him straight in the eye. "No. I know what I saw." He leaned closer. "You have no video proof, correct?" "Maybe not," I said, "but you don't forget the face of someone who enjoys watching your life burn." The jury shifted. Even the judge gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging the weight of that truth. After days of testimony, both sides rested. The closing arguments were electric. Ms. Harris's final words echoed in my head long after she spoke them: "Power corrupts. And when someone like the defendant believes she's above the rules, she becomes dangerous. Tonight, justice demands accountability." The defense tried to play the sympathy card, claiming Karen was mentally unstable and overwhelmed. But no one in that room bought it. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the entire courtroom buzzed with tension. Hours passed. Every minute felt like a year. Then, finally, the bailiff opened the door. "Jury has reached a verdict." We stood as they filed in, solemn and serious. The foreman handed the slip to the judge. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear. The judge cleared his throat and read the words that would change everything. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Davenport, guilty on all counts." Emily gasped. My knees nearly gave out. Karen's lawyer closed his eyes. And Karen? She just stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, her face pale. For once, the queen of the HOA had nothing left to say. The day of sentencing arrived like the slow turn of a storm cloud that had been brewing for far too long. 6 months had passed since the verdict, 6 long, quiet months where Emily and I tried to move forward. We bought a small temporary house on the edge of town, started sketching designs for a new home, and even laughed a few times again. But that morning, as I buttoned my shirt and looked into the mirror, all the memories came flooding back. The flames, the screams, the smell of burning wood, and the face of the woman who caused it all. Today, she would face justice. When we arrived at the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Reporters crowded the steps again, just like during the trial. Cameras flashed as I helped Emily out of the car. She still walked with a slight limp from an injury she'd gotten that night escaping the fire. "Mr. Lawson," one reporter called out, "do you think the sentence will finally give you closure?" I paused, looking past the microphones. "Closure doesn't come from punishment," I said quietly. "It comes from peace. But maybe this is a start." Inside, the courtroom was packed: journalists, curious neighbors, even a few former HOA members who had once feared Karen. Everyone wanted to see how the story would end. At the front sat Karen Davenport, in her orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed to her sides. Her once perfect hair was cropped short now, her face pale and emotionless. She didn't look like the powerful woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with iron fists and HOA fines. She looked defeated. Yet when our eyes met, something flickered there, not remorse, but that same cold arrogance. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. His gavel struck once. "This court reconvenes for the sentencing of Ms. Karen Davenport," he said. "Convicted of first-degree arson, criminal endangerment, and malicious destruction of property." The prosecutor, Ms. Harris, stood first. "Your Honor," she began, "the evidence in this case is clear. The defendant's actions were not impulsive, they were planned, deliberate, and fueled by a desire to cause harm. She destroyed a family's home and endangered 2 innocent lives. The state recommends the maximum penalty permitted by law." Her voice was steady, powerful. Then came the defense attorney. He stood, adjusted his tie, and sighed heavily. "Your Honor, my client has no prior record. She has expressed remorse." Karen suddenly turned, interrupting him. "I've expressed nothing," she said, her voice sharp, echoing through the courtroom. Gasps rippled across the benches. Her lawyer froze. "Ms. Davenport," she ignored him. "You all act like I'm a monster," she said, glaring toward the jury box, though the jurors weren't even there anymore. "But no one ever mentions how he started it. He mocked me, defied me, made me look like a fool in front of my community. You can't treat people like that and expect them to stay quiet." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order. Ms. Davenport, you will remain silent." But she didn't. "He took everything from me before I ever took anything from him. You think I wanted to burn that house? You think I planned this life? I was defending what I built, my authority." Her words cut through the courtroom like shards of glass. I felt Emily's hand tighten on mine. She was trembling. The same woman who once smiled politely at us across the street now stood there justifying the destruction of our lives, and somehow believed she was the victim. The judge's face hardened. "That will be enough." After a tense moment, the judge turned toward us. "Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Lawson, would either of you like to make a victim impact statement?" Emily looked at me and nodded. I stood slowly, my legs heavy but firm. Walking up to the podium, I took a deep breath. The courtroom fell completely silent. "When someone burns down your home," I began, my voice low, "it's not just the walls that are lost. It's the photographs, the keepsakes, the things that tell your family's story." That night, my wife and I watched our lives burn, while the person responsible stood across the street smiling. I looked at Karen. She didn't flinch. "I've tried to understand why," I continued. "Why anyone would hate so deeply. Why a neighbor would think control is more important than kindness. But after months of therapy and pain and rebuilding, I've realized something. Some people don't want peace. They want power. And when they lose it, they destroy whatever they can." I felt my throat tighten. "You didn't just take our home, Karen. You took our trust, our sense that people can be good. But here's what you didn't take: our will to rebuild. You thought fire could break us. It didn't." The judge nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." As I returned to my seat, Emily whispered, "You did good." Then it was the judge's turn to speak. He looked over the courtroom, his tone firm yet measured. "Ms. Davenport," he said, "your actions were deliberate and cruel. You abused your position of authority, terrorized your neighbors, and nearly cost 2 people their lives. This court has no patience for such behavior." Karen stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. The judge continued, "You claim you were defending your authority. Let me be clear, authority does not excuse cruelty. Power does not justify harm. You had every opportunity to stop, and instead, you chose destruction." He paused, looking down at the sentencing document. "For your crimes, this court sentences you to 25 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Gasps filled the room. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wide for the first time. "What? You can't," the gavel slammed. "This court is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. As deputies escorted her out, she turned her head one last time. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read them easily. "You'll regret this." Then she was gone. The door closed behind her, the echo fading into silence. Emily exhaled a shaky breath, leaning against me. "It's finally done," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's over." But deep inside, I knew it wasn't just about the punishment. It was about survival, about reclaiming our lives from the ashes she left behind. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon light, cameras flashed again, and people asked for statements, but I didn't stop this time. I just took Emily's hand and said quietly, "Let's go home." The sky was clear that day, the first truly blue sky I'd noticed since the night of the fire. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe, after everything, the world was finally letting us breathe again. Because justice had spoken. And for the first time in a long, long while, we were free. The morning after the sentencing, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in over a year, there was no weight pressing on my chest, no nightmares dragging me awake in a sweat. The house we were renting was small, barely enough for the 2 of us, but when I looked over and saw Emily sleeping peacefully beside me, I realized it was enough for now. Justice had been served. But closure? That was something we'd have to build ourselves. A week later, we drove back to the property where our old house once stood. The air was cold, the ground still scattered with ashes despite months of cleanup. The foundation was gone, replaced by a flat stretch of dirt and stone. It looked like an empty field, but to us, it was still sacred ground. Emily stood quietly, her arms wrapped around herself. "It's strange," she said softly. "It's like the land remembers." I nodded. "Yeah. But it's waiting for what comes next." We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then, without saying a word, I reached into my truck bed and pulled out a wooden stake. Attached to it was a small white sign that read, "Future Home of the Lawsons, stronger than before." Emily smiled through tears. "You made that?" "Yeah," I said, hammering it into the ground. "I figured it's time we start over. On our terms this time." Rebuilding wasn't just about walls and bricks. It was about reclaiming hope. We started visiting contractors, architects, and insurance adjusters. The process was exhausting, endless paperwork, quotes, and zoning meetings. But every step felt like healing. The community, surprisingly, rallied around us. Neighbors who once stayed silent under Karen's rule now showed up with casseroles, donated materials, even volunteered their weekends to help. One evening, old Mr. Jenkins from down the road stopped by while I was marking out the new foundation. "Heard you're rebuilding here," he said, leaning on his cane. "Good for you." Karen tried to scare everyone into thinking she owned this neighborhood. "You staying here?" That's your way of saying she didn't win. I smiled. "Exactly." He patted my shoulder. "Then you make sure it's the best damn house in this county." As the weeks passed, progress took shape. The first wooden beams went up. The roof trusses followed. Each nail that went in felt like a small act of defiance, against fear, against loss, against everything Karen had tried to destroy. Emily spent hours picking paint colors, light fixtures, and furniture. "It's weird," she said one afternoon, holding up 2 swatches. "Before the fire, I wanted everything perfect. Now I just want it warm. Real. Lived in." "That's the best kind of perfect," I said. She smiled. "You're getting good at this emotional stuff." "Yeah, well," I said with a chuckle, "burning down your house gives you perspective." We both laughed, something I never thought we'd do again on that land. But not every moment was easy. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, I could still smell faint traces of smoke. Other times, Emily would wake up in the middle of the night from dreams about the fire, her voice trembling as she whispered, "It's happening again." On those nights, I'd hold her close until she calmed down. We talked a lot, about fear, forgiveness, and what it meant to move forward. "I don't hate her anymore," Emily admitted one night, surprising me. "I just pity her. Imagine being so empty inside that you have to destroy others to feel in control." I nodded. That's her prison now, more than the one she's in. 3 months into the rebuild, we held a small ground blessing gathering. It wasn't religious, just a moment to mark a new beginning. Detective Ruiz came, along with Ms. Harris, the prosecutor, and several neighbors who'd stood by us through it all. Ruiz handed me a small box. "Something the arson team found after all this was over," she said. Inside was a half-burned metal key, the spare key to our old back door. "Thought you might want to keep it," she said. "A reminder of where you came from." I turned it over in my hand, the metal cool and rough. "Yeah," I said quietly. "And of what we survived." That evening, after everyone left, Emily and I stood beneath the unfinished frame of our new home. The sunset cast long orange streaks through the beams, painting everything in golden light. She leaned against me. "You ever think we'll really feel normal again?" I thought for a moment. Maybe not the old normal, but maybe something better. Something stronger. She smiled softly. "Then let's build that." A few weeks later, the walls were up, and the roof was finished. Emily planted a small garden in front, sunflowers, her favorite. As I helped her dig the soil, I noticed something, a few green shoots sprouting from the blackened patch where the fire had once burned the hottest. "Life finds a way," she said, noticing my stare. "Yeah," I said. "So do we." When the new house was finally complete, we didn't throw a big party. No cameras, no reporters. Just a quiet evening with friends and neighbors who had stood by us. Emily lit a single candle on the new porch. To new beginnings, she said. To resilience, I added. And for a moment, everything was still, peaceful, calm, and whole. Before going inside, I turned one last time toward the horizon. The night was quiet, save for the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the world moving on. The ashes were gone now. The ghosts had faded. What remained was the truth, not of what we'd lost, but of what we'd found, strength, love, and a reason to keep fighting for peace. As the light from the house glowed warmly behind us, Emily took my hand. Home, she whispered. Yeah, I said with a smile. Home. And this time nothing, and no one, could ever take that away again. It had been nearly a year since Karen's sentencing. Life had finally found a rhythm again. The new house stood proudly where the ashes once lay, bright, open, alive. Emily's laughter filled the halls again, and I'd even started building a workshop out back. The nightmare that had consumed our lives was finally fading into memory. Until one morning, when I turned on the TV. The headline froze me mid-sip of coffee. Exclusive, HOA arsonist breaks silence from prison. I was the real victim. I nearly dropped my mug. The screen showed Karen, sitting in a gray prison jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face thinner but still unmistakably her. She was being interviewed by a local journalist inside the state penitentiary. Emily walked in, still in her robe, holding her cup of tea. "What is that?" she asked, squinting at the screen. I shook my head. "You're not gonna believe this." The interviewer's voice came through the speakers. "Karen, you were convicted of arson and sentenced to 25 years. Do you accept responsibility for what happened that night?" Karen smiled, that same fake, confident smile I thought I'd never see again. Responsibility? No. Regret? Maybe. But I was pushed to a breaking point. People think I'm this monster, but they don't know what it's like to have everything you worked for taken away. Emily's eyes widened. She's actually doubling down? Looks like it, I muttered. The interview played out like a twisted version of the truth. Karen painted herself as the misunderstood victim of an unruly neighbor, meaning me, who, in her words, bullied the HOA and turned everyone against her. She said, "He broke every rule, challenged my authority, mocked me in meetings. I tried to be fair, but he wanted chaos. I kept order. That's what a good leader does." The reporter asked, "But you were convicted of intentionally setting fire to his home." Karen's smirk faded for just a second. "I didn't light anything. I was there, yes, but I was trying to warn them. They twisted everything. The fire was an accident." Emily slammed her cup onto the table. "She's unbelievable. There were witnesses. Footage. Evidence." I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept watching. Part of me wanted to turn it off. Another part needed to hear every lie she spoke, because sometimes, understanding evil meant staring it straight in the face. The reporter pressed on. "Karen, what do you say to the Lawsons, to the family who lost their home?" Karen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "They should thank me." The reporter blinked. "Excuse me." "I exposed them," Karen said, her tone sharp. "They think they're victims, but people need to know the truth. They were corrupt. They didn't follow the community rules. They tried to undermine me. They were planning to sue the HOA. I stopped them before they could ruin everything." For a moment, even the reporter looked stunned. Emily's hand covered her mouth. "She's completely delusional." "Yeah," I said quietly. "But dangerous, even from in there." Later that day, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Friends, neighbors, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were sending messages. "Have you seen the interview? Can you believe she's still blaming you? She's lost it completely." It didn't take long for the clip to go viral. Within hours, social media was filled with comments. Some people were furious on our behalf, others called her the craziest HOA president in America. A few conspiracy types even suggested maybe she'd been framed, proof that the internet will believe anything. Emily turned off her phone in frustration. Why did the station even air that garbage? "They wanted ratings," I said bitterly. And they got them. A few days later, I got a call from Detective Ruiz. "I figured you saw the interview," she said. "Oh yeah. Hard to miss." She sighed. "We had a talk with the prison warden. She was approved for that interview months ago, before they realized how manipulative she could be. They won't let her do any more media appearances. I paused. Do you think she's still dangerous? Physically? Not from behind bars, Ruiz said. But people like her, they never stop trying to control the story. Even if she's locked up, she'll try to make herself the victim. She's good at that, I said quietly. Too good, Ruiz agreed. But remember, the truth already won in court. Don't let her drag you back into her chaos. That night, Emily and I sat out on the porch of our new home. The air was cool, the stars bright. She sighed. I hate that she's still finding ways to reach us. I nodded. It's like she can't stand being forgotten. After a long pause, she said, Do you ever think she'll actually realize what she did? I looked out at the field where the fire once raged. No. People like her don't change. They rewrite the story until they believe their own lies. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. Then let's write our own ending. One that doesn't include her. Deal, I said, kissing her forehead. A week later, the news station released a follow-up segment, this time, with the reporter expressing regret for airing the interview. After reviewing additional evidence, it's clear that Ms. Davenport's claims were false. The Lawsons were victims, not aggressors. We apologize for any distress caused by the broadcast. It wasn't much, but it felt like the world was finally setting the record straight again. Still, something about the whole thing lingered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine Karen in her cell, pacing, plotting, replaying her version of events over and over. Maybe she still believed she had power. Maybe she thought she'd find a way out. But the truth was, she was already trapped, not just by prison walls, but by her own lies. And for me, that was enough justice. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten, messy, but unmistakably hers. It read, You can build all the houses you want, Mark. But you'll never rebuild your reputation. I'll be remembered long after you're forgotten. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled. I crumpled it up, tossed it into the fire pit, and watched the flames consume her words, just like they'd consumed the past. Emily came out with 2 mugs of coffee. What was that? Nothing important, I said, watching the last bit of ash drift away. Because it was nothing. For once, she didn't have power anymore. We did. After Karen's prison interview and that haunting letter, most people would have tried to forget everything and move on. But I couldn't. Not entirely. Every time I drove through a neighborhood with those pristine lawns and identical mailboxes, I felt that same chill down my spine, the reminder of how much power a single person with the wrong intentions could wield. The HOA system wasn't supposed to destroy lives. It was meant to maintain order, keep communities beautiful, and protect property values. But I'd seen how easily it could turn into a weapon, when someone like Karen used it for control, ego, and personal revenge. And that's when a thought started burning inside me. If Karen could twist the HOA rules to destroy families, maybe someone like me could use those same rules to protect them. That's how my new mission began. It started small. I reached out to a few neighbors, the same ones who had once lived under Karen's rule, the ones who had been fined for leaving trash cans out too long or for planting the wrong color of flowers. We met in my new backyard one Saturday afternoon. The sun was warm, the air filled with the smell of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke. There were about 10 of us, tired of fear, tired of silence. All right, I said, standing at the head of the patio table. We all know what it's like to live under a bad HOA. So let's make sure that never happens again, not here, not anywhere near us. Linda, the retired teacher from 2 doors down, raised her hand. You're talking about reform? Exactly, I said. We can't get rid of HOAs entirely. But we can make them transparent, fair, and accountable. No secret meetings, no hidden fines, no president for life nonsense. We make it democratic again. The group nodded, energized. One man, Carl, who had once been slapped with a $2,000 fine for building a shed without permission, leaned forward. I like it. But how do we do that? The state doesn't exactly care about what happens in small neighborhoods like ours. I smiled. Then we'll make them care. What started as a neighborhood meeting soon grew into something bigger. I created a small website, HOA Watchdog, where people could report abuse from their local associations. It was meant as a place for homeowners to share stories, find legal resources, and learn how to fight back. Within weeks, it exploded. Emails poured in from across the state, even from other parts of the country. People shared stories eerily similar to ours: power-hungry board members, unfair fines, threats, even cases of sabotage and harassment. One message stood out from a man in Texas. They told me I couldn't park my work truck in my own driveway. I stood up to them. Next week, my tires were slashed. Please tell me there's a way to stop this madness. Reading stories like that made me realize Karen wasn't a one-off case. She was a symptom of a much bigger problem. So I doubled down. I started reaching out to local reporters, legal experts, and even state representatives. I wanted them to understand that HOA abuse wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It was an unregulated system giving far too much power to the wrong people. Some doors slammed in my face. Others opened. One local journalist, the same one who'd covered Karen's trial, decided to run a follow-up series called The HOA Power Problem. She interviewed me and others who had suffered under abusive HOAs. The piece went viral. Soon, I was being invited to speak at homeowner meetings and community conferences. The first time I stood behind a microphone, my palms were sweaty, but my purpose was clear. I looked out at the crowd and said, I lost my home to fire, not because of bad luck, but because of a broken system that lets one person play dictator with everyone else's lives. I can't undo what happened to me, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you. The applause that followed felt different, not like praise, but shared pain turning into strength. Months passed, and momentum grew. The media attention forced local lawmakers to take notice. They scheduled public hearings to discuss HOA accountability, something that had never happened before. I attended every session. I sat in the front row, spoke when it was my turn, and told the story again and again. Not to relive the pain, but to make sure it meant something. Eventually, new legislation was proposed, the Homeowners Protection and Fair Governance Act. It required HOAs to make financial records public, limited board terms, and created independent oversight committees for complaint reviews. When it passed, I was there. Emily was beside me, holding my hand. She whispered, "You did it, Mark." I shook my head. We did it. Life took on new meaning after that. The website grew into a national network, volunteers, attorneys, and advocates helping homeowners defend their rights. Some called me an HOA reform hero. Others called me that guy who took on the system. I didn't care about titles. What mattered was seeing scared, frustrated people finally stand up for themselves and win. Even Karen's name came up sometimes, especially when I spoke to audiences. People always asked, "Do you forgive her?" I always gave the same answer: no. But I learned from her. And sometimes, learning from evil is the only way to destroy it. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I came home to find Emily sitting on the porch, smiling softly. "What's that look for?" I asked. "You," she said. "You turned a fire that almost destroyed us into something good. You didn't just rebuild a house, Mark, you rebuilt people's faith." I sat down beside her, looking out at the golden sunset. "I guess when life burns you down," I said, "you've got two choices: live in the ashes or build something stronger." She smiled. "And you built an army." I laughed quietly. "Yeah, maybe I did." That night, as the crickets chirped and the house lights flickered across the yard, I realized something. Karen's chapter in our lives was over. But her actions had lit a different kind of fire, one that spread not through destruction, but through justice, reform, and hope. And for the first time since that terrible night, I finally felt peace, not just for me, but for every homeowner who ever felt powerless in their own home. Because now, they weren't alone. Not anymore. A year after the HOA reform law passed, life had settled into something I'd once thought impossible: peace. My mornings were quiet again. I spent time in my workshop, built birdhouses for the local park, and volunteered with new HOA watchdog chapters popping up across the state. Emily and I finally took our first real vacation since the fire. But as life often reminds us, peace never lasts forever. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope, no return address, but the seal from the State Court of Appeals stamped on the corner. My stomach sank before I even opened it. I'd seen that seal too many times during Karen's trial. I tore it open and scanned the first few lines. Notice of appeal. The defendant, Karen Davenport, has filed for a re-examination of her conviction on the grounds of procedural misconduct. My hands tightened on the paper. She's appealing? I muttered aloud. Emily looked up from the couch, concern flashing across her face. What do you mean appealing? She already lost. She's in prison. Apparently that's not enough for her, I said, rubbing my temples. She's trying to overturn her conviction. Emily stood, her voice trembling slightly. After everything? After burning down our home, after all the evidence, she still won't let it go? I nodded grimly. Karen never knew when to quit. This isn't about freedom anymore. It's about control, about rewriting history one last time. The next few weeks felt like déjà vu. Lawyers called, reporters reached out, and the familiar hum of tension returned to our lives. The appeal wasn't a retrial. It wasn't about proving innocence or guilt. It was about process. Karen claimed that her legal team hadn't been given full access to certain evidence during the original trial. Her new attorney, a slick, media-hungry man named Victor Hayes, argued that critical procedural flaws had violated her rights. Hayes was good at what he did. Too good. He appeared on talk shows, calling Karen a victim of a broken justice system. He spoke with passion and practiced sincerity, convincing people that maybe, just maybe, the woman behind bars wasn't the villain the media painted her to be. Watching him speak made my blood boil. Emily tried to calm me down. Don't let him get to you. They're just trying to stir attention. Yeah, but attention is power, I said. And she knows how to use it. When the appeal hearing was scheduled, I promised myself I wouldn't go. I didn't want to see her again. I wanted that chapter closed forever. But as the date approached, I realized I had to go. Not for revenge, but for closure. The courthouse was packed that morning. Reporters, lawyers, curious citizens. It felt like a rerun of the first trial. Emily sat beside me, her hand in mine, grounding me as we waited for Karen to be brought in. Then the doors opened. There she was. Karen Davenport, thinner, older, but still radiating that unsettling confidence. She walked into the courtroom like she owned it, even in a prison jumpsuit. When her eyes met mine, a faint smile tugged at her lips. She mouthed, "Miss me." I didn't flinch. Not this time. The proceedings began. Her attorney, Hayes, launched into a dramatic speech about tainted evidence and media bias. He claimed that Karen's confession had been coerced, that she'd been emotionally manipulated by investigators. He painted her as a lonely woman under intense public scrutiny, who had cracked under pressure. Every word made my stomach twist. When the prosecutor took the stand, she calmly dismantled Hayes' arguments with fact after fact. She presented the body cam footage, the witness statements, and the forensic analysis, all of which pointed directly to Karen. But Hayes had one more card up his sleeve. He called Karen herself to the stand. Emily squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Karen stood, walked to the witness box, and faced the court. Her voice was steady, almost soft. "I made mistakes," she said, looking around as if addressing an audience. "But I didn't burn that house down. I was there, yes, but not to hurt anyone. I was trying to stop something worse from happening." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be, Ms. Davenport?" Karen took a deep breath, her eyes glinting with false sincerity. The Lawsons were building illegally. They had violated several HOA ordinances and tried to cover it up. I went there that night to collect evidence, to protect our community. But when I arrived, the fire had already started. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I clenched my fists under the table. "Liar." She continued, "Maybe I should have done more to help. Maybe I panicked. But I wasn't the one who lit that match." Her lawyer smiled proudly, as if she'd just delivered an Oscar-winning performance. When it was the prosecution's turn to cross-examine, they played security footage from a nearby traffic camera, showing Karen's SUV parked near our house minutes before the fire began. Then they read aloud the forensic report confirming traces of gasoline on her gloves. The courtroom went silent. Karen's expression cracked for the first time. Her eyes darted to Hayes, then to the judge. But the damage was done. By the end of the session, the appeal was denied. As the judge read the final decision, The conviction stands. Appeal rejected. Karen finally turned to look at me one last time. Her face was cold, emotionless. Then slowly she mouthed two words, "Not over." The guards led her away. The heavy doors closed behind her with a metallic clang that echoed through the room. Emily let out a shaky breath. "Do you think she meant it?" I watched the empty doorway. "She always means it. But that doesn't mean she'll win." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me again, just like before. "Mr. Lawson, how do you feel about the ruling? Do you believe Karen still poses a threat? Do you think justice was served?" I looked into the cameras and spoke clearly. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth. And the truth doesn't change, no matter how many times someone tries to rewrite it. Then I turned, took Emily's hand, and walked away. That night, I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something new, not anger, not fear, just release. Karen's fight might not be over in her mind, but in mine, it finally was. And sometimes, that's all the closure you need. The night after Karen's appeal was denied felt strangely quiet, not just outside, but inside me too. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't buzzing with anger or fear. The battle was finally over. The courtroom doors had closed, the reporters had moved on, and Karen was right where she belonged, a prisoner of her own making. But standing on my porch, under a sky filled with soft stars and the hum of crickets, I realized something deeper. This story was never just about her. It was about what fire can take, and what it can reveal. I once thought that when someone burns your world down, you lose everything. But now I understood, sometimes, destruction clears the way for something greater to grow. The next morning, I brewed my coffee and sat at my desk, looking through a folder of letters from people across the country, homeowners, neighbors, even former HOA presidents who'd reached out since I started HOA Watchdog. One woman from Arizona had written, "I used to find people because I thought that's what leadership meant. After hearing your story, I stepped down. Now our board actually listens to residents." A man from Colorado wrote, "I watched your interviews. You helped me stand up to a corrupt HOA that was stealing money from retirees. Thank you for reminding me that ordinary people can fight back." Each letter carried a piece of the journey, proof that pain could become purpose. Emily walked in with a smile, holding 2 mugs. "Still reading those?" I grinned. "They remind me why it all mattered." She set 1 mug down beside me. "You know, when it all started, the fire, the trial, everything, I thought we'd never recover. But now look at us." I glanced around the living room. Our new home wasn't just rebuilt, it was alive. Photos of our journey lined the walls, not to remember the pain, but to honor the resilience. "You were the reason I kept going," I said softly. Emily smiled. "No, Mark. We kept each other going." Later that day, I had a meeting downtown with the Homeowner Justice Foundation, a nonprofit that had reached out months ago. They wanted me to consult on national reform, to help write a new set of fair governance guidelines for all homeowners associations. When I walked into their office, I was greeted with firm handshakes and grateful faces. The director, a gray-haired man named Harold Benson, said, "You're quite the inspiration, Mr. Lawson. You didn't just rebuild your home. You rebuilt trust." I chuckled humbly. All I did was tell the truth. Harold nodded. "That's the rarest thing these days." We spent hours discussing new frameworks, accountability boards, transparency requirements, open voting systems. Things that could have stopped people like Karen long before they did any harm. As the meeting ended, Harold looked at me and said, "There's talk of starting a national campaign, Homeowners for Hope. We'd like you to be the face of it." For a second, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled. If it helps stop another family from losing what we did, I'm in. That evening, Emily and I went for a drive, the kind we hadn't taken in years. We passed by our old lot, the place where the first house had burned. The land was green again now, full of wildflowers and birdsong. It was strange. I expected to feel anger, maybe sadness. But all I felt was peace. Emily leaned out the window slightly. "You know, I don't see ashes anymore. Just new beginnings." "Yeah," I said softly. "That's exactly what it is." We parked by the edge of the property. The setting sun painted the sky in warm orange light, the same color as the flames that had once destroyed it, only now it felt cleansing, not cruel. I knelt down, ran my hand over the earth, and whispered, "You didn't win, Karen. You never could." A few months later, I was invited to speak at a national homeowners conference in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with hundreds of people, HOA board members, community leaders, government officials. I stood behind the podium, took a deep breath, and looked out at the crowd. When my home burned down, I began, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I really lost was my illusion of control. Sometimes you have to watch everything fall apart to see what truly matters: people, honesty, and the right to feel safe in your own home. You could have heard a pin drop. I continued, HOAs were meant to serve communities, not rule them. And it's our duty to make sure no one, not one person, ever has that kind of unchecked power again. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Some were clapping, others wiping away tears. It wasn't just applause, it was closure. That night, back in my hotel room, I stepped out onto the balcony and stared at the city lights. Somewhere far away, Karen sat in a cell, probably still convinced she was the victim. But I didn't feel hatred anymore. Only pity. Because she'd spent her whole life chasing control, and I'd learned the most powerful thing you can do is let go. Months later, I received one last letter, this one from the warden of the state penitentiary. Inmate Davenport has been transferred to a mental health facility for ongoing evaluation. She has shown no signs of remorse or acceptance of guilt. I folded the letter, set it aside, and smiled faintly. Figures. Emily glanced over. Bad news. Not really, I said. Just confirmation that some fires never go out, they just burn in smaller rooms. She chuckled softly. Let's hope they stay there. Forever, I said. Years passed. Our foundation grew. The HOA reform laws spread across multiple states. Families I'd never met thanked us for giving them their voices back. One afternoon, while teaching a seminar on homeowner rights, a young woman asked me, "Mr. Lawson, if you could go back before the fire and change it all, would you?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. No, I said finally. Because sometimes, losing everything is what teaches you how to fight for something real. She nodded, smiling, and I realized that was the legacy. Not the fire. Not the pain. But the rebirth that followed. That night, as Emily and I sat by the fire pit behind our home, I stared into the flickering flames, not with fear but gratitude. The fire had once taken everything from me. Now, it reminded me of everything we'd built. From ashes, I whispered, to legacy. Emily smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. And that's how our story ends. I smiled back. No, love. That's how it begins. Fire the end.